So this is what we sort of don't want to see. Okay, and again, you can see there we've got some reasonable elongation in the stem, but we're starting to accumulate quite a lot of dead material in the base of the pasture here. Okay, now this is all going to come off with that silage. Yep, we're going to put a heap in the bale, but what that's effectively means is that we're probably into this paddock probably 10 days too late, 12 days too late compared to when it should have been cut. We're probably going to have dropped at least a megajoule per kilogram of dry matter out of that silage. Okay. So what does that mean? All right. So if we just think about this issue about what a megajoule means, and again, we often trivialise this, but it's the absolute core of actually getting more milk out of conserved feed. Megajoule per kilogram across 200 tonnes of dry matter of silage, that's going to give us around 200,000 megajoules. Now, if we're going to give that to healthy milking cows, okay, at about 5 megajoules per litre of milk, that's going to be equivalent to around 40,000 litres worth of milk on that decision. Now that again is around $20,000 plus worth of milk depending on what you're getting for it, but it could be up to $70,000 worth of milk depending on what people are getting paid for that. The flip side too is that feed has got a lower NDF or lower fibre value, so the cattle can actually eat more of it, which is actually what we want. We want higher levels of intake because that drives more production. And the other big issue is that it optimises the regrowth on that pasture as well and the quality of either subsequent grazing or subsequent silage cutting. So we talked a little bit before about aerial tillering. And again, what we can see here on this picture on the left, all right, is a really nice example of what happens when you let ryegrass grow too long. Okay, you get these jointing occur and you start getting roots drop down from these joints. Okay, and from there we get tillers starting to come out of the stem rather than at the base of the plant. And there's an aerial tiller here, okay, potentially rooting coming along here. The base of the plant's way back over here. All right, so yeah, huge impact here on quality. And if silage is a big part of your milk production business, quality is king.
Hey, Neil, I just ran some quick numbers on that. So if you're looking at about 80 hectares, $20,000, you're looking at about $250 a hectare.
Yep.
You just paid for all your seed for the whole kit caboodle for your winter feed.
Winter cropping program. Yep, grows pasture crop. No, it's profound. And I guess we do start to see these differences occur in better fed herds that are and it feeds into herds that have got their reproduction right. They've got fresh cows. They're free of parasites. You know, whenever someone comes and talks to you about the extra megajoule or 5 megajoules meaning a litre of milk, you've got to be a bit careful with that assumption. That's it in theory, but certainly once you start getting the other parts of the equation right within your whole farm system, these are the reduction responses we do see to better quality feed or more. Okay, and again, the differences in silage quality can be a lot more than a megajoule. You know, we've seen up to 2.5 to 3 megajoules difference across the same farm within their ryegrass programs. All right, so look, just a few quick tips on silage making and cutting and wilting. And again, different people are going to have different systems. And I guess quite often it's sort of how hard do we need to wilt, how quickly do we need to get it down? And I guess for pit silage, we're targeting 30 to 40% dry matter. For round bales, look, we can go in at 35, but we like to get that up probably closer to 45 to 50%. If we get it off the paddock quickly, okay, there's a huge benefit to that with respect to chasing regrowth, particularly if you're after subsequent cuts. And again, the quicker we can get our silage dry, the more sugars that we can serve as well. So rapid wilting is absolutely king. And I guess this is where, particularly when you've got big bulky crops, having conditioners with your cereal silage, absolutely critical. And again, being able to rapidly get out and get the tedder rake onto your pastures and get them thrown out if you've mown your silage into windrow is very, very important. If you're putting it in too wet, we're likely to get poor fermentation. And again, when we're juggling with contractors, particularly forage harvesting contractors, and they're racing to get to the next farm, it is important that we work with them to try and make sure that they're not rushing a little bit to try and get stuff into those silage bales or pits just a little bit wetter than we'd like, because it can lead to big issues with respect to the quality of the silage that comes out the other end. Similarly, if we've gone in too late and we've been held up and we're going too dry, we can have issues with poor compaction, with those bales being airy or those pits being airy and they breathe and they have much higher risk of spoilage as we go through. So again, being really focused on cutting and wilting is absolutely critical with the silage programs. this is just an excerpt from the Dairy Australia publication on silage, which is excellent. Okay, but look, again, what we're really out to do is to maximise this wilting issue. So the tips that they give: mow in the morning after the dew's lifted, and then later if harvest is possible within 24 hours. Ensure the blades are sharp and set to cut at the correct height. We do see, particularly on paddocks that undulate, if the blades are set too low, people will come onto a bit of a ridge in the paddock and they'll scalp the crowns of those plants out, and they won't grow back very well after that. That could be a big issue, particularly if people have got perennial ryegrass and they've cut it too low. We've seen big areas of paddocks killed from doing that. Make sure your tractor's sufficiently powered to maximise the mower output. Wilt it quickly. And again, the leafier and stemmier it is, the longer it's going to take, and the harder you need to work with your conditioning and your tedding. All right. So if possible, what we really like to do is get our silage harvested within 48 hours after mowing as possible. So the big debate often, I see this particularly in the hunter, more so than over the other side, is do we do silage or do we do hay? And I think there's strengths and weaknesses of both. It's just worth touching on these as discussion points as much as anything. Silage, you tend to be able to make it earlier in the year. Doesn't need to be fully dried, which means we can get off the paddock quicker. It can be stored outside. It can be pitted for the long term if people are actually out to build longer term storages. And again, as we said, we can get it off the paddock within 48 hours quite often, or quicker, which allows rapid re-watering and regrowth, particularly in irrigation areas. A couple of the downsides, obviously there's a wrapping cost, and we need to manage plastic at the other end, and there tends to be a bit more capital needed for harvest. With respect to hay, it's generally a bit lower cost to produce, and it's ideal if drying conditions are favourable. It's got lower spoilage risk if it can be shedded. Now again, I see a lot of hay left out in the hunter in particular to spoil without covering, and I think it's a huge issue because we can lose 9, 10, 15, 20% of that dry matter, as well as associated increase in moulds by leaving. So if you are looking to potentially sell it, hay tends to be a bit more portable and a bit more saleable. And again, if it's been made really nicely, it can have really, really high palatability. It can be fed out in feeders with less spoilage if not eaten quickly. So I quite like hay. If I've got a group of heifers that might only be eating, a couple of kilos each a day, if you put hay in a rack, it'll last for a week or so. But if you put silage in, as soon as we open that silage up, if it's not consumed quickly, it'll start to deteriorate and rot in the middle. Large losses of stored outside tends to tie up your paddocks a lot longer with slow rewatering of long drying times. And I guess the other word of caution, we saw a bit of this last year, is that if you've got high nitrates, okay, in your fodders, hay will not remove those nitrates. And we did actually have a couple of very high nitrate ryegrass hays made a couple of years ago that were problematic with cattle. If you have high nitrate issues in your soil, in your pastures that you're worried about, silage will denature quite a few of those, and is likely to result in a safer feed over time. But if you are worried about nitrates, I'd certainly urge people to get it tested. All right, so look a little bit on inputs, and I think this is just taking us down a slightly different pathway. I guess, Kyle, you might want to give us a bit of an update on sort of urea pricing, but my understanding, that we're still in a pretty good space with respect to the value chain at the moment. Where are we at, guys, on urea on farm? What's it sort of landing for?
Look, you're looking at out of Newcastle, it's just over 500 a tonne bulk at the moment. It has gone up significantly. It was only weeks ago. We were kind of down around that 450, 440. There is the potential for it to continue with world price being higher than what we are on at the moment, but it's held where it is for the last 10 days with no change. So from more reports, AP, so your DAP, MAP are coming back, which is atypical of this time of the year. But yeah, urea will, the forecast is it will continue to go up a little bit. So it looks like it will with good crops being around, and going into summer cropping looks positive as well. So it's likelihood it will go up.
Yep. But we're still unlikely to see it crack through 650, 700, I would have thought, Kyle.
Oh, not at this stage anyway. Not at this stage. has definitely got the potential, possibly, but later on. But yeah, look, at this stage, the price it's at, it's a perfect storm to grow feed. There's no doubt about that at where it's sitting.
Yep.
So,
That's awesome. So look, I think when we looked at about even 600 a tonne, we're only talking about 6.5 to 13 cents, depending on your response per extra kilogram of feed. So it certainly is going to pay if your pastures are nitrogen responsive. And we're looking at getting at this time of year, depending on what you're feeding, anything up to 20 kilos of dry matter per kilogram of nitrogen applied, and potentially more than that on some high yielding spring forages. So, Josh, did you have anything you want to add to that? Are you comfortable to move on?
No, that's good, Neil. And yeah, 20 is definitely achievable on responsive pastures at the moment.
Which means your extra feed's about $65 a tonne dry matter, or 6.5 cents a kilo, which is pretty cool. So grain prices, these are looking pretty sensational, I guess, really from a dairy farmer's perspective. What I've got up there is the last sort of bid sheet, and I just regularly have a look at the AWB website and just see what sort of money they're starting to offer for new crop. And again, what we're seeing here is these numbers, which very much reflect what Rob Cooper was saying earlier on the AWB offers for Feed One barley for new crop, sort of sitting out there at $170 to $190 a tonne is probably the closest stuff to you guys there at Werris Creek. So that is a pretty exciting opportunity. I think it's a long time since we've seen a kilo of grain worth half the value of, or less than half the value of, a litre of milk landed on farm. So again, it doesn't mean we should be walking away from doing a good job in the paddock. It just means we're in a better position to make the most out of our normal levels of grain usage, but it also allows us to have greater flexibility, I guess, with respect to maybe testing our systems and seeing what happens if we do push a bit harder. And also gives us option to manage temporary feed shortages a little bit differently from what we may have in the past. The sheet down the bottom, that's just off iGrain. And again, I just did a search on New South Wales barley for sale on the iGrain website. And again, they were the prices that came up when I did that on Friday last week. And again, we're seeing on even current crop, which is the 1920 season 1920 crop, those prices from last year's grain in some of those grain areas at very respectable levels, I think. Now again, you've got to watch quality, and again, some of that's BAR2, which is feed 2 barley. Okay, but look, F1 barley certainly broadly becoming available, I think, shortly in the mid 200s and drifting down potentially out there at under 200 a tonne. There are a number of operators looking to run contracts already, and again, we've got some clients looking at those at the moment if they're in the right zone. I guess when feed's plentiful, there is the two schools of thought here. Do you bother contracting because it might get a bit cheaper, or do you contract because then you know where your business is going? I guess I probably encourage people to take a bit of a split on it. Lock some in at a reasonably good price, and you know where most of your business is going, and then maybe be prepared to float on some based on the fact that the seasonal conditions are good, and there does have to be abundant supply. But I guess locking in too much can sort of also restrict you from looking at other options if they become available to you, and that'll depend on the farm. And a good example, I guess, might be where wheat sits or corn sits. At the moment, corn's tracking, probably $100 above barley, but we know that the corn growers are saying that they want to keep it higher. But the reality is that corn after harvest is going to have to track, where barley is to sit in the market and be competitive for people to buy it as a feed grain. So it's likely to come back as well. Similarly, barley, wheat's tracking probably $50 to $70 a tonne above barley, but if we see wet harvest and a bit of sport book grain or a bit of shot and sprung grain, we don't quite know where that price is going to sit. So look, I think broadly it's a very, very positive space here with respect to grain pricing, and I guess it's time for people, if they have the capacity on farm, to make sure their mills are working well, and just reassess what they've been doing with respect to buying concentrates over the last couple of years where supply has been very, very difficult. I think we're also likely to see a big shift in the byproduct space. We're also seeing some quite dramatic drops in things like dried distillers grain and the distiller grain based feeds, as well as mill run, and they're likely to continue to track down to really competitive space. So they'll be able to be integrated into grain based feeding systems as well. I guess we're seeing the slowest recovery as always in most of the mainstream pellet suppliers, because they tend to be a bit long on supply. They've bought grain to make sure they've got supply now, and sometimes that will mean they're a few months behind the rest of the general market with respect to prices coming down. So yeah, so look, I guess we'll pop that one up for comment, but I think it's a pretty interesting space. Rob Cooper might want to jump in with some of the stuff he's seeing out that way, because he's feet on the ground, or what are other people hearing on farm from their grain merchants?
I think there's Neil. There's a fair bit of time to go yet on locking things in. Yeah, it's only just started really. But if you've got a good person that you can contract with, and they'll especially store a bit on farm for you, that sort of deal is worth looking at. So you know what you're budgeting for, and that's I think that's pretty important. So you're not out there looking at the price all the time, and if you can sort of lock in a reasonable deal where they deliver a load every week or every 2 weeks or something. It's worth doing that for your budgeting and management purposes, really.
Yep. No, look, I think there's going to be some very good deals out there, Rob, and as we move forward. But I guess we just need to see a few headers start to move around as well, I think, and that's still a month or so off in most places. So, but it'll be there quick before you know it. So yeah, keep in touch with your grain merchants and your growers, I think is the critical thing. And I think there'll be positions to take on locking in, but there may not be a huge benefit to locking in too early until we see where it really settles.
The same, just can I mention on cereal hay, there's quite a bit being made at the moment. So if you have got empty sheds and maybe not a lot of surplus of feed, it might be an opportune time to just put a bit away at the right price.
Yep, it's a bit going down west of you, Rob.
Yes, yeah. I haven't seen much, but hearing the reports of it,
Yep.
Has any been frosted yet at all, or any issues like that you've heard of, Rob?
No, I think they just missed it, as far as I know, but that's probably a big statement covering a lot of area, but yeah.
Big state. I think what you've got, Josh, and that I've heard is that a few of the guys that are more specialist hay growers and are worried about the grain price are trying to take a little bit of a risk split and go in early with a bit of hay before it loses all its quality.